I just had the amazing privilege of getting early access to see the brand new movie about the Von Erich family, The Iron Claw. But what did I think about the film? Well, that's what we're here to talk about, because today... Thank you to all the wonderful supporters out there who support me over on Patreon, like True Sinister and The Reflection of Perfection. To find out how to get your own Patreon shoutout, please go over and check out my Patreon page. The good people at A24 were kind enough to send me advance tickets to see the brand new film, The Iron Claw, based off of the Von Erich family. And while the movie hasn't been released everywhere yet, it is coming soon. But should you see it? Well, that's what I'm here to talk about. And I just want to make it clear that this is not a sponsored video, as they did not pay me to say any of these things, and everything you're about to hear is my own opinion on the film. And with that, let's begin by me pointing out that from my experience in the world of independent wrestling and in the world of independent filmmaking, I have to say that this movie could not have been easy to make. So hats off to writer-director Sean Durkin for everything that he did. Now, having said that, one, and I mean just one, of the many reasons why talking about pro wrestling is so difficult in film is because you have to cater to so many different groups of people. First off, you do need those outside fans in order to really build up your box office. But you also don't want to lose the hardcore wrestling audience. And even with them, there are different layers to that. There are the super hardcore fans and fans of all different ages, some of which in this case might have remembered the Von Erichs and others who were born way after. So you have to make sure you speak to all of them, but at the same time you don't want to lose the ones you're not talking to at that exact moment. You can't slather the whole film with wrestling lingo because then you're going to lose the non-fans, but at the same time you can't stop every 2 minutes to explain what a wrist lock is because then you're just going to make your target audience get bored. And in this regard, I have to say that Durkin did a very good job of walking the line, and he also did another good job of walking the fine line between kayfabe and, well, breaking kayfabe. How did he do this? Well, he did it in a very interesting way. But before I talk about that, I do want to broach on the concept of spoilers, because I don't really know how to tackle this, as if you know anything about really rudimentary wrestling history, well, you know how the story ends. But at the same time, there are some revelations and some scenes that you might not know about, and in that case, I won't be talking about any of those. So if you want to go into this movie completely fresh, alright, well, consider this your spoiler warning. But I am going to be discussing things that, well, I've talked about already on this channel in like 2 other videos, if not more. So take that for what you will. Anyway, going back to how this movie handles kayfabe, this is a tactic that I think was rather unique, and I've never really seen it done before in this way. Yes, they do address the elephant in the room about whether or not professional wrestling is a work, and they do this relatively early. But they don't directly answer this one way or the other, as they say that it's a performance. And for the rest of the movie, they really don't do anything to break the illusion, but at the same time, they don't do anything to keep it up. It's pretty much whatever you want to think, which I found pretty interesting. And now yet another fine line that this movie walks is the same problem that a lot of biopics have, is how do you ride the waves between glorifying someone, but at the same time not painting too high of an image of them. And yet again, I thought they struck the balance here really well. On one hand, you do see how much the brothers love each other, and you do see it as a caring family, but you also see how overbearing and harsh Fritz could be, and you see the pressures of growing up as a family in the professional wrestling industry. Now, I don't think that they show them as flawless individuals, but at the same time, I do think they did a good job of building them up and really letting you care about the characters. And one of the major ways they did that has to be Zac Efron's performance. Now, all the actors did an outstanding job in my opinion, from Holt McElhaney as Fritz Von Erich, to Lily James who portrayed Pam Atkinson, and Jeremy Allen White who played Kerry Von Erich. That dude's the bear! But Zac Efron in particular really dissolves into the role. You really buy him as Kevin Von Erich. And personally, this might be the first Zac Efron movie I've ever seen, so I don't know what his acting capabilities are outside of this, but in this film I have to say I was really, really impressed. And again, it's not just him, as all the actors involved did an outstanding job of playing their respective characters. But since we are talking about family members, I do have to say one of my major gripes with the film is the lack of all of the Von Erichs. In case you weren't aware, Chris Von Erich is actually not in the movie at all. He's not mentioned, he's not referenced, he's just not in this film. Now, I did some digging as to why this is, and I found an interview with Chavo Guerrero, who worked as a consultant on the film, and he told Chris Van Vliet and said that he had a conversation with writer-director Sean Durkin, who said that it was just too much tragedy, and upon thinking about it, Chavo himself said who wants to see a 3.5-hour movie. Although in this particular case, I would say that I for one would. I am not a fan of long movies. I think movies are way too long nowadays. However, this is a rare exception where I will say that if this movie was longer, I would be perfectly okay with that. Now, the movie clocks in at a tight 2 hours and 12 minutes, and while normally this would be a perfectly acceptable runtime for me, in this scenario, I think I could have gone as much as 3 hours and been perfectly fine. As I see it, this movie used all 132 minutes to its full potential, as the first half did a fantastic job of setting up the real love between his family, the closeness between the brothers, and then the second half is where, all the bad stuff happened. It had to build you up in order to let you down. But if we got somewhere around a half an hour added to the film where we could incorporate Chris and just a little more breathing room in between certain events, I think the movie would be just as good, maybe even better. Going back to the interview, the issue of Chris was also brought up by other family members such as Lacey Von Erich, who is also not a character in the film. And ultimately, I think this sums it all up, since this movie really does play fast and loose with specific family members. But I think the key here is, as Chavo put it, this is not a documentary. And we should remember that this is a movie, and in which case, we don't necessarily need authenticity, we just have to remember that this is a story in and of itself, even if it is inspired by true events. And so, if you went into this movie not knowing anything about the real life family, I think you would really enjoy it. And so, if you stubbornly cling on to a need for accuracy, well, that would prevent you from enjoying this film as much as you should. And that's a shame, because this really is a great film. And again, remember, this is a scripted movie about a scripted sport, and if you really are just going to be a stickler for authenticity, then let's just remember that Kevin Von Erich looks about as much like Zac Efron as Frank Abagnale and Howard Hughes look like Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, in terms of the other Von Erichs that don't make an appearance in this film, such as Lacey Von Erich as well as David's wife and kids and so on, well, I do understand that, as I think this film really is more about Kevin than it is anybody else. And while it might be slightly weird that they're not brought up, I do understand that from Kevin's perspective, they're not really needed for this particular story. And while we're talking about Von Erichs that aren't really featured in this film, I do also have to bring up MJF. Now, AEW did a great job of hyping up this movie and letting you know that MJF is in it. However, what they didn't tell you is that he's barely in it. So if you were going into this movie thinking that he was going to have a significant part in this film, well, don't hold your breath, as his part is really relegated to a blink and you'll miss it cameo. And if some of you were wondering how could they glaze over Lance Von Erich so quickly, well, that brings me to another omission, but in this case I actually think it's a good thing, because this movie really doesn't talk too much about kayfabe storylines and feuds, as it's really more about the behind the scenes stuff, which I think is more important for this movie. But that's not to say that wrestlers like the Freebirds aren't in this movie at all, because they are. However, that does bring me to my next point, and this is another way they kept the hardcore wrestling audience engaged, and it's that this movie is loaded with Easter eggs. If you're a hardcore wrestling fan, or if you really like WCCW, you are going to notice tons of stuff, things that they don't even directly address in front of the camera. And for me, this made the movie a lot of fun, and it was a great way to keep the hardcore audience happy. Seeing them recreate the match graphics, and actually recreating some old matches in and of themselves. And don't get me started on how fantastic the Sportatorium looked. It looks identical to the real thing. And in addition to those minor aesthetics, the overall cinematic quality of the film was absolutely excellent. I love how the movie had that old feel, as I'm always okay with a movie recreating the look of my childhood, and in a world where we're all used to the WWE fixed hard cam, well, I have to say, getting to look at professional wrestling from different angles is always quite refreshing. So, what did I think of this movie? Well, if you couldn't figure it out by now, I absolutely loved it. I highly recommend you see this movie when it hits theaters everywhere. If you're any kind of wrestling fan, you're gonna want to see this, as this kind of movie is not something we get all the time, which is rather a shame. As anyone who loves this industry knows, there's a lot of heartache that goes into it, which is all the more reasons why stories like these need to be told to the entire world. And if the stories themselves are this well told, then you absolutely owe it to yourself to see it on the big screen. Not to sound like that Nicole Kidman commercial that plays before the movies where she tells you how great the movie theater is. Listen, it's been 2 years, I already know. Stop selling me on this, I'm already here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the movie. the Iron Claw. I can't wait till the rest of you see it. I hope you love it as much as I do. Please leave a like for this video and make sure you're subscribed to this channel, as I want to give all of you a big thank you for watching. And I also want to thank all of my amazing Patreons and the good people who made the movie The Iron Claw. Thank you so much again. And as always, Dave knows.